Welcome to our June the 28th webinar in the EOCCS Learning Community series of webinars. I'm very, very pleased here to have today two practitioners, Lars and Vas Taras. I'll introduce them more fully later. But I'm here just to introduce our theme. I'm Keith Pond, Director of EOCCS, the EFMD online course certification system. And we're interested not just in recognizing good practice and quality by giving certificates to schools and courses and MOOCs and providers of MOOCs that really sort of hit the quality standards that we have benchmarked, but also to share good practice in our community. And that's what today is about. And today our theme is something that a lot of people are turning their attention to at this end, and hopefully it is an end of the pandemic. We've struggled with technology, we've struggled with classroom situations, professional meeting situations, and we realize that as human beings, we need something more than a face on a screen and a voice in our headphones to communicate. Well, two guys we've got speaking today, this is work they've started and have been doing since way before the pandemic. They're important things, building relationships, and typically building international relationships and intercultural relationships online, because this is possibly a big part of our future, not only with the technology availability, but the sustainability agenda means that we won't be hopping on trains and planes and meeting face to face as frequently as we perhaps did in the past, that far more of our working lives are going to be around virtual meetings like this. So how do we make them the best we can? And coming from that academic perspective, what can we learn from all and any sort of discipline areas that we can bring to make our interactions with our students, with our co-workers, with our colleagues, as good as they can be. So just before I introduce Lars and Vas, I'd like to ask you to join us in a poll, because we'd like to know about you. There's a poll just with a couple of questions asking you where you've come from today, where you're joining us in the world, and what your role is at your institution, how you would describe yourself from our drop-down list. And that will help our speakers later on understand exactly where your questions are coming from. Okay, maybe that's a little bit, it's certainly not too early for Vas because he's here, but maybe a little early for the Latin American members of our community, and a bit late for Australia. Okay, thank you for that. And we've got quite a wide range there. Are you able to display the results, Teresa? Thank you very much. Well, this is because we time things in the European time zone. That's not surprising that during the working day you find time to be with us from Europe, but welcome everyone else as well. And that this is something that we're going to be very interested in exploring with you later as how that works in your different parts of the world and different cultures. And you can see there we've got a lot of sort of faculty members, lecturers, but also managers in academic departments, support staff, and professionals in internationalization. So that's great. Thanks for that, Teresa. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our first speaker. What's going to happen is that our speakers are going to speak for around about 10 minutes each, tell you where they're coming from, what the work they've been doing, and then we will enter into just an open discussion, and we'll gauge exactly how to do that. If a question occurs to you as you're sitting and engaging with our speakers, please put it into the chat, and we'll call on you to ask that question later, or if there's similar questions, we'll put them together so that we can put those questions to our speakers and get answers for you. So without further ado, can I introduce to you Lars Vilner? Lars is from Oslo in Norway. He is the consortium leader of EduBots, which he's going to explain to us what that is, and the CEO of the EdTech Forum, which, as his background says, is the home of Differ. So Lars, take it away, and please help us understand what bots mean in education.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. The bot part I'll come back to later. I'm Lars. As Keith mentioned, I live in Oslo. But I would like to start off with just a brief personal anecdote. When Keith asked about kind of building relationships online, it made me think about when did I actually build my first relationship online. And I was born in the early 80s, and I grew up on the countryside in a small town with perhaps 500 people. And I think it's fair to say that I wasn't the most popular kid in class. Do you remember ICQ, the chat application? I see some nodding heads here. I think many of us tried that out in the 90s. And I think I actually had my first girlfriend with an American girlfriend when I was 12. I think that was my first online relationship. And that was probably as I explored in the first personal computer that we had at home. And I think ICQ was one of the pre-installed applications that just came with a bundle. I think the relationship was fairly short, and I don't think we went to the second base. But I think after that I have kept exploring the digital world and the digital opportunities that we now have. And partly I want to be part of building new opportunities for people to connect and get to know each other, and hopefully create longer lasting relationships than it was in the early 90s. Just a quick introduction for myself. As Keith mentioned, I'm the CEO of, we just say Differ. That's the product coming out of EdTech Foundry, which is kind of the formal company name. But basically, I'm the CEO, and I'm also leading a European project now where we explore the best practice use of chatbots in higher education. So I think we'll come back to the EduBots part in the end, but I would like to kind of focus in a little bit on the context that you are operating in. I think many of you are working in different business schools together with students. So I try to bring in the student focus here, and I think the part is also how do we develop new skills? How do we make this work? I think we all have been thrown into a lot of online meetings and online presentations, but I wonder how many long-lasting relationships do we get out of that? One of the amazing opportunities we as a company had was working with BI Norwegian Business School. We had the opportunity of doing a 5-year-long project that ran 2015 to 2019. That's pre-corona, so it's really a important work that was done where we explore the future learning experience or the future learning environments. And over the course of 5 years, we had the chance of trialing and erroring. Is that even a word? But doing research and development. I guess that's the fancy word, where we explored how we can support students to become more active participants in their learning journey, and shifting from what was considered a more passive learning mode. And I believe that concept of active students seems to be the holy grail of education. How do we make everyone active and participating in discussions and asking questions and just flourishing in this amazing on our amazing campus where there's so much interesting and lovely people. But it is a big challenge to build and culture learning communities. I think that is one of the important learnings that we had from this long project, is that kind of how do you facilitate a community, and how do you facilitate personal relationships among all the participants. And it's not just it's not as easy as it is a student, a teacher, a learning assistant, but all of these people are individuals. And as we are pushing for the widening participation agenda, how we're pushing for a more international students coming in, the student body or the organization is becoming much more diverse. So I think that sets a different agenda for us as an institution when we want to facilitate learning communities, is that everyone is different. And one of the insights, we don't have time to really dig into all the details, but one of the insights that we had about why students are not active is because they lack psychological safety in their learning community. So just symptoms of that is that they might not feel free to raise their hand and raise questions that they really need to ask, or they might not participate in discussions, whether it's physical or online. So that lack of psychological safety was a key that we found. And one way of facilitating that psychological safety is the relationships. So I just want to bring that context into the story here, because why do we really need to build relationships online? Well, that's a kind of an area that we can design to become a safe space to connect and start the first awkward conversations. So I think that feeling of safety is one of the things that you all can think about. How can we build that into our learning environments, and kind of what type of relationships are we encouraging students to build with each other? And also I want to highlight the importance of the student induction or the student onboarding into communities, and the cultural and the communication rules that are established very early. So basically, the students are looking for signs or signals about how should I relate to the others in the community. So they are looking for leaders, community leaders that shows the way. But being that first one to follow is also scary. It's not just about leadership. It's also about having early followers that show students how they should relate to each other, how they should relate to the relationship, to the professor, and what type of conversations are we having in the community. Yeah, so that's something that I wanted to share as a start here for the community conversation. I think I'll stop there, and then we can rather discuss and take ideas or take questions and discuss different ideas later on. But thank you.
Okay, Lars, thank you very much. And I know there's an enormous amount more you could tell us about DIFRA, and I hope people are going to be interested enough to ask about its deployment, especially at BI, Norwegian Business School, and the progress you have made from those early days to now getting people into those communities. But let me turn now to Vaz Taras, who was looking at these issues. Vaz is from the Bryan School of Business and Economics, University of North Carolina in Greensboro, USA. And he's the founder and coordinator of the EOCCS project. Vaz is going to tell us a lot more about the EOCCS project, but I came across this project when planning a master's program at my home university. And we wanted to send students to have these intercultural experiences. We wanted that to be part of a strong part of the syllabus. And with a colleague who spearheaded this, Vaz was able to deliver something that was embedded in our master's program and still is to this day. Vaz, can I ask you to take the floor and yes, tell us EOCCS and something that predates many things. It's a real pioneer in this area.
Yes. Originally, Keith told me you have 10 minutes to share your knowledge about global virtual teams. And so obviously it would be impossible to tell much in 10 minutes, but I will share with you four perhaps most important lessons I learned after about 12 years of studying global virtual teams. As Keith said, my job, so to speak, is to manage this EOCCS project that I launched in 2010, long before the pandemic, long before people knew what Zoom is and how all this stuff works. And so briefly what that is, we have about 6,000 students, now not only students, now we have some employees as well, but mostly students, MBA students from all around the world. So they come from about 150 universities in a given semester, from about 60 countries and 6 continents. So over the years we've been doing it, we've had over 85,000 participants. And so what we do is we place these students in global virtual teams so that there would be 6, maybe 7 students per team, each one in a different country. And so as they complete the project over the semester, they sort of learn how to deal with the time zone differences, cultural differences, institutional differences, how to use online communication tools. So they basically experience in real life what we teach them in the classroom. And so since 2013, we also team up usually with about 10 to 15 companies that present real life challenges for the students to work on. And so essentially it becomes almost like a big consulting platform. So where the clients ask for help and students spend that semester trying to solve the problems. The very first client was Mercedes-Benz. They were trying to develop some sort of a marketing strategy for Africa. And so they wanted some ideas for slogans, for advertisement, for marketing. And so our students came up with a lot of good ideas. Mercedes was so happy they invited 30 students to visit their factory. So we spent some time there, kind of meeting with the management, seeing how the production works. And so since then, we would invite quite a few different companies each semester. So for the students, it's also an opportunity to apply their skills in real life. And for the businesses, it's a wonderful opportunity to conduct sort of large scale market research, to get brilliant ideas from these young people, to maybe get some business leads and things like that. And so I found myself in this situation where on the one hand, I have about 1,000 global virtual teams. And on the other hand, I have these real companies. And so my job here is to figure out how do I organize these teams in a way that produce the best possible results for the clients. So we are collecting enormous amounts of data. It's over 2,000 variables that we track on a continuous basis, all trying to understand why some teams do better than others, why some people are more effective as global virtual team members and others seem to struggle. And so here are 4 things that I sort of learned. There are many more, and we published dozens of papers, but there are 4 that are, in my opinion, the most important sort of factors. And at the same time, factors that I still have not figured out what to do about. So we have done hundreds of experiments, found ways to improve things, but not fully resolve the problems. So the first 2 are not only sort of boring, but almost to the point of being depressing, because you realize that some things maybe you will not be able to do anything with. So this slide probably will not tell you much, but this is the slide that shows the data that are predictive of who's going to fail as a global virtual team member. So when the project begins, we receive all those about 6,000 names of the participants who will be in the project. And we know that approximately 2–3% of them will be bad team members. Like they will be so bad, the team will vote them out and they will say, we don't want them on the team, we want them out. So we basically better proceed with fewer people on the team than work with these people. And so we've been digging into all kinds of data, trying to predict who's going to be a bad team member, who's going to be so bad that we wish we knew that in advance and not even allow them to participate. If I ask you what is the best predictor of failure, I guess I could, and you can probably type your answers maybe if you want to do that in comments, and then you can compare it with what I say. But I've asked that question many times, and people talk about things like maybe it's personality, or maybe it's work ethics, or maybe it's the grades from high school, or maybe it's some sort of test performance, or maybe it's older people or younger people, or maybe it's from people from some countries, or things like that. The truth is that the best predictor of who's going to fail is here on the slide. You see essentially a collection of rosters sent to me by the professors whose students participate in EOCCS. And because it's a large project and we have virtually a zero budget, we have to optimize everything. We have to make everything as standard as possible, as efficient as possible. And so one of the things that I ask the professors to do is to send me the student names in a very particular format. So name the file using your professor's name so that I don't have to look for whose students those are. Provide the student names in a full legal form in the first name, last name format. If it's a foreign name, I may not know which one. It's like if it's Peter Smith, I know that Peter is the first name, although again, could be an exception. But for some names, it's impossible for me to figure out which one is the first, which one is the last name. If you give me the name with last comma first, I have to manually change it. So I give them a few rules that, the names should appear in this format. Most professors have no problems following these rules, but some professors do. Some professors put student names in the body of the email, not as an Excel attachment, the template that I give them. Some professors, as I said, capitalize all names. And if it's like a Dutch name like Van der Zee, I don't know if Van der should be capitalized or not. So please do it right. So if you give me all in capital letters, I cannot figure that out. And so at some point, we started tracking what we call strikes against professors. So every time the manager, the professor, the boss, makes a mistake in that simple template, it's a strike. And so what we found is that if there are more than 3 strikes, if the professor made more than 3 mistakes, following these simple rules, half of the class will probably not graduate. Like it's an iron rule. I mean, it's a law. And so what that tells me is that you can have the best of the best employees on your team, but if the manager, if the boss doesn't care or screws up or doesn't provide the necessary support or doesn't pay attention, all kinds of bad things will happen, even if the students themselves are perfectly fine. So management matters, and I know it's not related to virtual teams per se, but again, we can be talking about things like time zone differences, cultural differences, those sound very virtually teamy, so to speak, but they seem to be not as important as some more mundane things. The other big predictor that was found accidentally, and again, is almost to the point of being depressing, is this. So when we get all those student names, the first step that they have to do is to complete what we call a readiness test. So there are about 100 questions. They have to complete some training. So they need to learn how the project operates. They need to learn how to use Zoom, Dropbox, Google Docs, Skype, some of those tools in case the team wants to use them. So we give them some training, some materials to review, and then there is a question, a test. And so we always would be looking at this last column. At this column, like fifth from the percent correct. So we always thought that students who answer more questions correctly, they will perform better in the project. But luckily for us, the software we use to collect the data, Qualtrics, it provides some metadata, which is, it tells us something about what students did, irrespective of the answers. And one of the columns it automatically generates is the percentage of questions attempted. So percentage of questions that students attempted to answer. And I'll be honest, for a long time, I never paid attention to this column. And in fact, I would just delete it. I mean, who cares how many they attempted? Tell me how many they got it right. But then once we were doing some data mining and we're literally correlating everything with everything. And so the best predictor of all the columns, personality, language skills, school rank, like all kinds of things we looked at, the best predictor was actually the percentage of questions attempted on the test. And so here you have an example of a real file. So this column here, so if students don't perform well, if the team is not happy, we put them on probation. And then if the situation does not improve within 1 week, we kick them out from the project. And here you see the percentage of questions attempted for those students. So as you can see, most of them actually answered enough questions. They got grades like 80 and above. But some of them, I don't know if it was lazy or maybe not diligent enough, or maybe didn't, I don't know, care or not paid attention. But some of them, as you see, didn't attempt every question. Like, this student attempted only 94%. This one attempted only 96%, and so on and so on. And so these are the students, as you see, almost universally, who were then put on probation, and then some of them were even excluded. Again, I wish it was about something sort of we can manipulate, like, as I said, maybe select smarter people, or select older people, or more experienced people, or people with a certain personality profile. But it seems like the good, plain old diligence matters much more. So if the person cannot find the time or does not pay attention and skips some questions, like even the person gets a good grade on the exam, like this one, 84% correct, right? But only 82% of the questions attempted. So those that attempted, the person was on probation. So again, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but again, as a manager, we can be talking about those fancy schmancy, theories of global virtual collaboration, but if the person doesn't care, nothing will help. So, and now two more kind of fun things, related specifically to global virtual teams. One is the invisibility of effort of others, and the other one is lack of personal contact. So every week in EOCCS Culture, we do peer evaluations. And one of the questions in the peer evaluations is literally reads like this: of all the work completed last week, what percent was completed by each team member, including you? And so the students would see 6 names or 7 names, which one is you, and then it's formatted in a way that it must be 100% total. And so they would distribute the percentage of work done among the team members. So like if you had 5 team members, you would expect to see about 20% per person. If you have 6, you would expect like 18% or something like that, right? Now, the question I have for you is this. So there are 6 people on the team, each one does it, and each one sees a different name, you, like in this case, let's say it's Andres Gonzalez who is answering the survey. If I add up all 6 self-evaluations, what percentage do you think I will get? So, obviously you can probably guess that people give a little bit more to themselves. So they think that they do a little bit more than an average team member. But if I add all self-evaluations, how much do you think I would get? like here is basically the averages that we see across, and by now like 85,000 people. I mean, this is not unique to culture, not unique to the level of studies, year, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. So we get something like this. So on average, people give themselves, basically, if you add up all self-evaluations, the team would have completed more than 200% of work. So which tells me that people overestimate their own contribution compared to the team members by about a factor of 2. Now, I don't think they're lying. I don't think they're trying to make themselves look good. I think the reason here is that when you work in global virtual teams, you have a difficult time. In fact, it's impossible to see what other people are doing every minute of, like if we were on the same assembly line, I see you all the time, I would see how much work you do, or if we work in the same office. But if we work in a virtual team, it's hard for me to see what you do, and our brain does not perceive what we don't see. And so I always think that I work at least twice as hard as an average team member. Now, there have been a lot of studies on free riding, on social loafing, like why people don't participate. And so the best predictor of why people stop working is so-called perceived injustice. So I would stop working if I think that I work more than you do. So in that case, I kind of reduce my effort because I think that I'm doing more work than you do. So why should I work more? But that's the problem. So the perception of injustice is very much skewed in global virtual teams, even if everybody does the same work. Like you have a perfect team, you have 5 team members, everybody does exactly 20% of the work. In my mind, I do 40% and you all do about 15%. Right. And so I think, well, that's not fair. I do more work than you do. And so I reduce my effort. And then all kinds of bad things happen. So when you look at at research on consequences of free riding, like when people stop working, all kinds of bad things happen. Second thing that happens or contributes to free riding is this lack of individual contact. In fact, to some extent, I'm not really grateful for the pandemic in a sense, you know, like the pandemic. But one good thing came out of it, that finally everybody learned how to use Zoom or Skype or some other video conferencing tools. So when we did the project for about 10 years, in fact, before the pandemic, we had to teach students how to do it. And even then, many people would have this aversion to using video conferencing. And so if you don't use the video, like if I don't see your faces as I do now, what happens is in many cases, people don't even know who the team members are. They would see like literally 2 words on the screen, name, and they don't even know who this person is in a sense, like man or woman, old or young, I don't know, race, ethnicity, interests. In fact, this name is a real name of one of our professors who had worked with us for many years. And it sometimes asked me for a reference letter. So the professor teaches in Saudi Arabia. And I guess stereotypically assumed that's a man. And so I wrote a reference letter for a man, Nur Hayati Zakaria. It turns out it's a woman. Like I didn't know because it was all virtual collaboration. Now, in a team, that's a problem. Like if I develop personal relationships with you, if I know you personally, I sort of have that sense of obligation of kind of social responsibility. I cannot skip my assignment because we are friends. You expect me to work on it. I mean, I know you're a real person. But if it's a virtual team, in many cases, it's only like, you know, like Lars said, you know, ICQ or Zoom or Skype or, you know, whatever the tools, email usually, right? And so in most cases, we don't really know much about each other. I mean, I may know something about you, but not really you as a person. And so I don't have that same sense of responsibility and obligation to you. So it is much easier for me to skip a meeting, or it is much easier for me to miss the deadline, or to not explain to you what's going on. And again, that leads to all this problem with social loafing. If you are not participating, why should I? And so, yeah, that's basically, you know, a graph of what happens when people stop performing. If you have a team of 10 people and you lose 2, you would think that the productivity would drop by 20% because you lost 20% of the, you know, team members. But in reality, you have this what we call morale loss. So you have, you know, to regroup. You have to spend time on trying to figure out who will be doing what now that 2 people are not participating. People get depressed. People get upset. And as a result, the performance suffers much, much more than the proportion of the, you know, sort of brains and hands lost from the team. So yeah, and as I said, studies have shown you, this is a summary of some information from a meta-analysis on free riding, but basically, you know, all kinds of things, you know, bad things happen when team members stop contributing. So from psychological to performance, all kinds of things get worse. I'm going to stop here. Again, I have many more numbers and slides and examples of the experiments that we've done. But yeah, if I need to kind of summarize something in a few minutes, those are some of the important lessons that I've learned.
Well, thank you very much, Vaz. And I know from your website, the EOCCS website, if anyone wants to visit that, you've got a wealth of data you've collected. And am I right in saying it's still open to researchers?
Yes, very much. And again, I see most of the people here are practitioners. So we're very, very interested in collaborating with you on the research front. So if you have questions, we would look at them and try to answer them, or if you would like to look at our data, we can help with that. If you would like us to collect some data specifically for your needs. And the reason we are so interested in collaborating with you is because even though there have been over 800 professors who have participated in EOCCS, and it's like close to 160, 70 in a given semester, pretty much all of them are professors of either international business or management. And so we are sort of clones, like we all went to the same schools, we all got the same education, we all read the same books, we all publish in the same journals, we all go to the same conferences. And so it's a huge sort of amount of brains, but they're very similar. And so we come up with the same ideas over and over again. You come from some different fields. And so my hope is that your experiences, your knowledge, your questions may be a little different. And so perhaps you will give us some ideas for new, better studies, or studies that we would have not thought on our own. And so maybe with your help, we can then make new discoveries that we would have not made, working only in our type group. So therefore, yes, if you're interested in any research, or if you need help on that front, we would be very, very interested in collaborating.
Thank you very much. Well, I can see we've got one question in the chat, but if you could, anyone else find the reactions button to the bottom of your screen so that you can put your hand up and signify that you'd like to ask a question. But if I can ask Rifat Bashir, are you with us, Rifat? There's a question there. I wonder if you'd like to put that to Vaz.
I don't think it's Rafat, it's Professor Amir Sharif from the University of Bradford. I think I'm logged in through her details, perhaps, whatever. But thank you anyway, Keith. I was interested in the demographic data you've got there. Maybe I need to have a look at the EOCCS website. The slide picked out only Pakistani students, and I'm just wondering, is that a demographic or geographical issue? What were the other, you've got several thousand students. I'm curious as to why those students, and were you trying to say something there? I'm not sure, but in an age where we have to be mindful of different cultures and different demographics,
No. So yeah, my apologies. So it's not intentional. So the students are always sorted by professor and then by the name within that class. And so the actual file, you can imagine 6,000 names. It's a very, very long file. And so here I just kind of took a snapshot, and it happened to be all students from this professor's class. So it doesn't mean anything. And in fact, when we look at, for example, nationality, there seems to be no systemic difference from country to country. So it just happened to be that in this particular class, because it's sorted by professor, all of them come from the same class. It's not sorted by like alphabetically by name or alphabetically by country or by some other form. It's literally by professor. So as you can see, all of them come from the same school. Now, there are two things. So at Pakistan, the UK, the United States, at the national level, there seems to be no differences whatsoever. In fact, much of my research is specifically on cultural comparison of nations. I've published a lot of studies on cross-cultural differences. But in EOCCS, what we see is that we cannot say that people, for example, from China do better and then people from Pakistan do worse. It seems to be all about those personal or group differences. And so here you actually see two things going on. Again, irrespective of the country, two things are going on. One, I showed you the relationship between students not attempting all questions and then putting on, going on probation. But there may be another thing going on, and that's that first one. So all of them are from the same class. And so it's very possible that this is one of those professors, again, irrespective of his nationality, irrespective of his maybe even university. It just happened to be so that this professor here could be one of those professors who perhaps did not provide enough information to his students. And as you can see, it's like 1/3 of his class basically are struggling. So we see that all the time in different countries. So sometimes there would be an American professor who, for example, didn't do a very good job, and so his students are not informed, and then as a result, they do a lot of have a lot of problems. Like, for example, in the United States, we noticed a recurrent problem is that professors treat their students not as students, but as essentially paying customers. So in the United States, it seems to be very important to keep students happy. So not to teach them, but to keep them happy. And so what many professors do, trying to sort of make them happy, but in reality, it's sort of hurting their experiences, is they say, okay, students, we have a wonderful opportunity for you. You will be learning new things. You will have a great experience. You will meet people from all around the world. You will learn about other cultures. You will enjoy it so much. And so don't worry, if anything goes wrong, I'll help you. And so when students experience problems, they come to professors and professor says something like this: oh, I'm so sorry, you poor things, you deserve better. You need to have a better team. I'm so sorry that you have this bad team and that they're not performing and you do all the work. Let me talk to us. We're going to punish them. So because a student like you deserves a better team. And so what that creates is that professor is trying to sort of, help the students and make them feel better. But the students, one, blame all the problems on the professor because the professor did not deliver a good experience. The professor did not make the course like a walk in a Disneyland park, right? Second, the student thinks that the problems they experience is because they are not lucky. They are unlucky to have a bad team. So they don't realize that it's part of, like if you've ever worked in a team, you probably always had someone who is not performing well. Maybe you had someone who is too bossy or too shy or too disrespectful or whatever it is. And so students, the whole point of EOCCS culture is to give students an opportunity to experience it so that they know what to expect next time. But again, in some countries, especially where students pay a lot of money for education, so professors start feeling guilty that the students have this kind of, set of challenges. And as I said, in many cases, that leads to students stopping to perform because they think, well, if I have such a bad team, why should I work on this? So there are, as far as performance, I wouldn't say that there is a difference country by country. But there are some sort of perhaps reasons for bad performance from some countries, and so I gave you here a couple of examples.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of when information is presented online, colleagues can make interpretations by association. I had exactly the same thing that you've been talking about, Vaz, on the summer school that I run every year online. We had about 80 students per session. We ran 14 sessions with students from all over the world last week. Very successful. But I'm very mindful of whenever you put something on a slide and you show it to an intercultural mixed audience, people will make some assertions. So I was just conscious of the data. Data is a killer, actually, because students
That's a very good point.
pull it apart like I've just shown. So thank you for the explanation. But yeah, I think we've got to be really careful with the cultural aspect.
Yeah, I actually need to pay attention to that. Maybe I should kind of resort the data because you're right. I mean, no matter which snapshot I take, it probably will be one class because I can only display so many names. And then you're right, people can start making generalizations based on that very small subsample of the full file.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. Lars, if I can bring you in on this as well. I mean, what practical solutions have you found for those students who are not as diligent? Are there things you can do there?
Good question. In my instinctive feeling or reaction to the question and the discussion is that it might be a little bit too late. Then you haven't done a good enough job in the initial phase, in the onboarding into the type of cultural rules, how we communicate as a group, what type of social skills that you have to learn how to overcome some of those challenges. So in that onboarding, there might be some resources and some opportunities for students to learn how to overcome that type of mental biases. We know for a fact that you overestimate your own contribution. So students might you might be able to prepare students for that. And then change the kind of perception of the situation. So yeah, that's some.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was thinking along similar lines myself, and I wonder, very often as educators, we look at things from the perspective of the course I'm teaching. Why aren't the students prepared? Whereas actually we need to step back and say institutionally, how are we onboarding? What are we doing to induct students into this way of working? I just wonder if anyone else got any comments or questions they'd like to put. to our speakers.
Can I ask a question of the audience?
Absolutely.
So we have many practitioners from what I see here. So not professors, but people sort of in the real world. I'm just curious, how difficult was it for you to convert to this new reality when I assume most of you had to switch to telework over the last couple of years, maybe, you know, manage that conversion for your employees. So what were the biggest challenges that you experienced in the sort of in the corporate world? I'm just curious how different it is from academia. And sorry, I mean, there are so many people, I'm not sure how, I didn't think about how the answers would come. Would people type them in the chat, or people would raise hand?
I think people can do either of those things. Sort of, if you've got a reaction, a response to as there on how to, you know, how you've overcome those issues, because there is this, you know, not just in the States, it's in the UK and in parts of Europe where there is assumed between educators and students, whereas, you know, in a work situation that model is different. But I wonder if, you know, is there anything we can learn from each other on that?
How about you, Lars?
I can jump in there.
Yeah, it's your institution.
I found it a bit challenging to yeah, it's that level. If you don't meet physically, then you get kind of a almost unconscious social glue, where you get some a certain level of base trust in the team or in the organization. So I think it's been a risky year here, where when everyone is really tired and exhausted, you just go straight to business. You just care about kind of your business task, and you don't spend enough. Yeah, you don't compensate for the lack of that base trust level in the organization. So then I think those assumptions about the effort that I put in versus others, for example, that becomes more of a problem. So I think what we try to do is spend enough time per week on informal, non-business interaction.
One thing I see from research from my colleagues and some of the research we do, the importance of all those minutes, so to speak, shared either around the water cooler or a cup of coffee over lunch, or maybe a glass of beer after work. We knew it was important. We knew that's when some of the interesting ideas are exchanged, or maybe some, I don't know, develops, you know, trust develops, or, you know. And so for the last 2 years or so, we basically didn't have that opportunity. So we only do work-related stuff, either email or Zoom, you know, but we didn't have that opportunity to informally to socialize. And so now more and more research emerges that actually slowed down collaboration, innovation, creativity. In many cases, people feel less committed to the organization. So we will still see the consequences in the coming years, but it seems like, you know, work is important, but those things that happen between work are equally important for work. And so we've had now kind of a strange natural experiment when all of that didn't happen. So yeah, especially with the new employees, those who had worked together, so they already know each other, at least to some extent. But some new people, like for example, at my school, we hired a couple of professors 2 years ago, right before the pandemic. And so I still never had a chance really to meet them. So like I never talked to them about possible research collaboration projects, which I would have done, you know, day one when I see them face to face, but here we just didn't have. So I don't know.
So I'm curious, Vas, about something about some of the outcomes from these international collaboration projects that you're running yearly, and so have you done any research on the kind of the skill outcomes of that, and I'm thinking about the social skills, and partly what's the relationship outcomes of these projects, Do students keep in touch with their international teams, or is it just more a transactional thing that once the project is done, then we're
we actually had
back to our regular life?
Yeah, we had the first wedding of 2 students right before the pandemic. So there were, well, before the pandemic, also twice a year, we would bring the best students for a face-to-face meeting at a symposium. And so we had 1 student from the United States and 1 student from Italy. And so they were members of the team. They stayed in touch, they corresponded. And then in 2018, we had the big symposium in Macerata, Italy. And so that's where he proposed and she accepted, and then they had a wedding right before the whole mess started. So some students,
Sylvia, with your head
just
up.
stay in touch. Yeah, we had a few teams that formed companies together. But then again, I think it would have been much, much more engaging if it was all face-to-face at the social sort of level. But at the same time, what this virtual collaboration allows us to do, so lately we've been doing a lot of research on what we call basically crowdsourcing. So you all know that sort of crowds of amateurs have changed many industries now. So you had the Encyclopedia Britannica published for like 270 years. And then amateurs come and form Wikipedia, and in a matter of a few years, essentially killed the Encyclopedia Britannica. We had taxi companies fully dominating the transportation in the city, and then Uber comes and a bunch of amateurs essentially, take a substantial portion of that market. We have that same with Airbnb, same effect, and so on and so on. And so what we are trying to figure out is it possible to have a crowdsourcing model where amateurs, big crowds of amateurs, can compete with big business consulting companies. So can large crowds come up with better solutions, better ideas than a few professionals from a professional consulting company can? And so we've been doing a lot of experiments on that front. And so the advantage we have now in these, in this time, is that we can collect a crowd of thousands from all around the world. People with different knowledge sets, people with different backgrounds, people with different connections, people globally, but each one of them is a local in a specific market. And so we believe that we can do to the consulting industry what Wikipedia did to the Encyclopedia Britannica. So we believe that a large crowd of semi-amateurs can outperform, or at the very least supplement and be very helpful to professionals from professional consulting companies. So we'll see if we'll succeed at it, but we do make some good progress. And so our companies often say that the quality of work, the type of research our students produce, is often better, or at least similar to what they would have gotten from professional consultants for fees that are astronomically bigger. And here you get some of the things that even professionals cannot come up with. Like, you may not know as a professional everything about the local markets. You may not have those thousands of hours to put into research, whereas when you have a large crowd, you can do those things. So that's where I see a lot of promise for the virtual collaboration. You can have employees anywhere on the planet that don't have to be in the same office. Yes, they will miss some parts, but also that collaboration, that global sort of dispersion gives you some advantages that the co-located team doesn't have.
Faz, thank you for that. Sylvia Didier had her hand up a little while ago. Probably got fed up.
Yes.
Of
No, I didn't get fed up at all. It was rather, I thought the topic moved on, and I thought it was very interesting what you were saying. I wanted to get back to what you asked before. How is it in the corporate world? I'm working with the corporate world and with academia, and what I see in the corporate world, I think that we need to be more intentional. Like you said, we need to create possibilities to meet with others. And I think we need to be more explicit. For example, if we're in the meeting room, we can sense, okay, do people agree or do they disagree? Over the screen, this is very difficult. And probably we have to ask, do you say nothing because you agree? Or do you say nothing because you disagree? You need to be more explicit. So that was the one point. And the other point that the question that I have, I'm more and more confronted at the university with hybrid formats. So it's not totally digital. I have of the students in the classroom and part of the students online. And I personally feel that is particularly challenging. It's not so difficult to have everybody online. I mean, there are certain challenges, but to have a hybrid format is very complicated. And do you have experience with that? And what are your thoughts on that? That would be very interesting.
So something that I'm thinking of when you say hybrid there, Well, I guess hybrid is you can interpret that differently. It could be both both online and offline at the same time, but
Yes.
it could also be asynchronously. So you have online first and then offline. And in the context of the area that I work is kind of facilitating ice-breaking and conversation starters to have that in that first chat online asynchronously, and then you might meet up in person to develop the relationship further. And I think also just connecting with Vas and what you mentioned, I interpret what you offer as a great shared experience. And I think shared experience is one of the key components of how you can develop relationships. So that was just something that came to mind when you mentioned the hybrid situation.
That's very, very topical, because we are, entering the possibly post-COVID workspace, and there will still be some countries that are not as advanced in vaccinations and with illness rates, where people won't feel comfortable being in a face-to-face situation. I think hybrid is something that we've got to tackle. And it's almost, Sylvia, as you read our minds in the community, because I think hybrid is one of those things that, we can devote a webinar to in the future. But wow, I have a feeling here that we've only just started this conversation. Perhaps it's my fault, and shall I apologize for opening up such a vast and interesting subject and then limiting our speakers to a very short space of time to respond. But I think what we've has an enormous amount of experience put before us this afternoon. We've got there is a lot of research materials in there, and some of the key lessons here are just the basic ones about being well organized and thinking through that student journey, as Lars told us about, of how they begin to interact and how students, clients even, begin to interact, and how we can encourage them to interact more. And as Vas says, sometimes it's just the basic things about being organized, being properly trained on the software, but also being careful about the detail. And being careful about the detail, I'm afraid I have to draw things to a close, because we advertised this for an hour. You've been very patient listening to us. I hope you've learned a lot. May I thank our speakers, Lars Vilner and Vas Taras. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. We have one final webinar of the season. Well, it's a webinar/workshop, if you're interested, on the use of simulations in teaching, especially in business teaching, the use of simulations and bit of gamification, but that's on the 22nd of July. Registration is open now, but I hope if you're interested in that topic, you can join us. But actually these two topics join, because very often simulations are with groups, teams of students who are collaborating, and at the moment collaborating online. So perhaps it does continue this conversation. Thank you for Teresa's put that link in the chat. Thank you very much, Lars and Vas, and thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.